My boss uninvited me from the company's luxury retreat, saying my presence would bring down the caliber of attendees. He collapsed when the island resort manager welcomed me as the owner's daughter and showed everyone to the presidential villa I'd reserved in my name. Your presence would bring down the caliber of attendees. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke as I stood frozen in Richard's doorway, my professional smile still plastered across my face while something inside me cracked. My boss leaned back in his Italian leather chair, fingers steepled, wearing that particular expression I'd come to recognize. False sympathy barely masking smug satisfaction. I just don't think you're executive material yet, Emma, he continued, his voice carrying just loud enough to reach curious ears in the open office beyond. The Sullivan Island Resort is extremely exclusive. Our clients expect a certain level of polish. His gaze flicked dismissively over my sensible navy blazer and practical pumps. The irony might have been comical if it weren't so painful. Sullivan Island Resort. My father's crowning achievement, named after our family, the place where I'd spent childhood summers helping the staff fold towels and learning to swim. Before we begin, I want to thank you for joining this journey. Ever felt overlooked despite your talents? Today's story of a brilliant marketing executive facing workplace discrimination might hit close to home. If you enjoy tales of reclaiming your power and standing in your truth, hit subscribe. It's free and helps our community grow. Now, let's watch as Emma's boss discovers exactly whose daughter he's been underestimating. I am Emma Sullivan, daughter of Robert Sullivan, the reclusive resort magnate, as the business press calls him. Not that anyone at Horizon Marketing knew this. That was entirely by design. I understand, I replied evenly, though my heartbeat hammered in my ears. Thank you for the clarification. Walking back to my desk through the maze of suddenly busy coworkers pretending not to have overheard everything, I maintained perfect posture. Another lesson from my father. Never let them see weakness, Emmy, he'd say. The moment they smell blood, they'll tear you apart. 3 years ago, fresh out of my MBA program where I'd graduated top of my class, I'd made a decision that confused everyone who knew my background. Instead of taking my rightful place in the Sullivan Hospitality Group empire, I chose a mid-level position at a modest marketing agency. My father had been puzzled but supportive. Find your own path, he'd said. That's a luxury my money should afford you. I'd watched wealth isolate him over the years. People either wanting something or too intimidated to be authentic. His 3 failed marriages were testament to how money complicated human connection. I was determined to succeed or fail on my own merits, to know that the relationships I built were genuine. My apartment in the unfashionable part of town was comfortable but unremarkable. My 5-year-old Honda was reliable if unimpressive. My wardrobe consisted of quality basics rather than designer labels. These weren't hardships to me. They were choices that reflected my values. Richard Blackwell, however, interpreted my lack of status symbols as a lack of ambition. Perhaps even ability. The Henderson Beauty campaign mock-ups need revision, Lisa from accounts said, dropping a folder on my desk, interrupting my thoughts. Richard wants them by morning. The Henderson campaign. My campaign had already been approved by the client last week. These revisions were undoubtedly Richard's attempt to keep me too busy to dwell on my exclusion from the retreat. Of course, I replied with a professional nod. This was familiar territory. Last month, it had been my concept for the Mitchell sports drink that Richard presented to the client himself, conveniently forgetting to mention that the entire campaign framework had been mine. The month before, I'd been mysteriously uninvited from the final pitch meeting for the Wilson retail account after developing their entire rebrand strategy. Richard had a particular talent for undermining without leaving evidence. The women's cosmetics accounts, the household products, the softer brands always seemed to land on my desk, regardless of my proven track record with technology clients and financial services. My computer pinged with an email notification from Margot Winters, the newly hired VP of Client Relations. Can you drop by my office at 4? Want to discuss your thinking on Apex. Brilliant work. MW. This message alone would send Richard into a strategic panic. Margot had witnessed my presentation on digital transformation strategy last week and had asked several insightful questions. Unlike Richard, she'd openly acknowledged the depth of my research and the innovation in my approach. That single moment of professional recognition had felt like rainfall in a desert. Richard had noticed our connection immediately. His eyes had narrowed during the meeting as Margot engaged with my ideas, and afterward he'd hovered nearby when she complimented my work, quickly interjecting himself into the conversation. As I gathered my notes for the meeting with Margot, I caught Richard watching me from across the office, his expression calculating. He'd been increasingly agitated since I'd landed the Apex Technologies account, a major tech firm that had specifically requested me after seeing my work on a smaller project. The Apex win should have been celebrated. Instead, Richard had immediately assigned Tyler and Jason to support me. "You'll need backup on this one, Emma," he'd said with a tight smile. "It's a big account for someone at your level." Both men were junior to me in experience and position, but they were unquestionably members of Richard's boys' club, frequently invited to his golf outings and whiskey tastings. Their addition to my project wasn't support. It was dilution, a transparent attempt to split the credit three ways when success came, or to have scapegoats if anything went wrong. Margot's office door was open when I arrived, and she waved me in with genuine warmth. "Emma, come in. I've been reviewing your Apex proposal again. The integration of AI predictive analytics with traditional consumer behavior models is fascinating." For the next 30 minutes, we engaged in the kind of substantive professional conversation I'd been craving. No politics, no posturing, just authentic exchange of ideas. When she suggested becoming more involved with the Apex account, I felt something dangerous. "Hope? Richard mentioned you won't be joining us at the retreat next week," Margot said as our meeting concluded. "That's disappointing. It would be valuable to have your perspective." My carefully constructed professional mask nearly slipped. So Richard had already been laying groundwork, likely suggesting I'd decline the invitation due to some personal inadequacy. "Yes, unfortunately I won't be attending," I replied neutrally. "Well, we'll catch up when we return," she said with a smile that seemed genuine. "I see tremendous potential in your work, Emma." As I walked back to my desk, I noticed Richard emerging from the conference room with Tyler and Jason, all three laughing comfortably. They quieted as I approached, exchanging glances. "Emma," Richard said with artificial brightness, "the guys have had some great ideas for the Apex campaign. We're thinking of pivoting from your original concept. More dynamic, more cutting edge. We can discuss when I'm back from the retreat." And there it was, the familiar pattern. The retreat would happen without me, decisions would be made in my absence, and my work would be repackaged under someone else's name. But this time would be different. The Sullivan Island Resort wasn't just any luxury destination. It was my legacy, my history, my name literally carved into the foundation stone. As Richard walked away, I made my decision. For 3 years, I'd hidden in the shadows of my privilege, rejecting it in pursuit of authentic achievement. But perhaps it was time to step into the light on my own terms. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to a number I rarely used. "Dad, we need to talk about the company retreat next week at the resort. I have a favor to ask." Dad didn't call back immediately after my text. That was typical. He was probably in some high-level meeting, or perhaps taking his evening swim in the private cove at our family's main estate. Over the years, I'd grown accustomed to delayed responses, understanding that his empire demanded constant attention. So I tucked my phone away and focused on reworking the Henderson campaign mock-ups that didn't actually need reworking. The next morning arrived with a crisp autumn chill. I was already at my desk by 7:30, a full hour before most colleagues would arrive, when my phone finally lit up with my father's response. Interesting timing. That location was specifically requested by someone at Horizon. "Call me after your all-hands meeting today." My blood ran cold. The monthly all-hands meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., and I hadn't mentioned it to my father. Somehow he already knew about it. Typical Robert Sullivan. Always 3 steps ahead with information that should have been impossible to obtain. It was both impressive and unnerving, even as his daughter. By 9:55, the glass-walled conference room was filling with the entire Horizon marketing staff. I selected a seat halfway back, visible enough to be present, far enough to avoid unwanted attention. Richard stood at the front, practically bouncing on his toes with barely contained excitement, while his assistant Julia arranged branded gift bags on a side table. "Good morning, team." Richard's voice boomed with theatrical enthusiasm as the clock struck 10. "Before we dive into department updates, I have a special announcement that I've been absolutely dying to share." He clicked to his first slide. A stunning aerial photograph of a lush tropical island with pristine beaches and an architectural marvel perched on its hillside. My heart skipped a beat. I knew that exact view. It was the marketing shot I'd helped approve 3 years ago for the Sullivan Island Resort brochures. Ladies and gentlemen, as a reward for our exceptional Q3 performance, Horizon's top performers will be attending a 4-day executive retreat at the exclusive Sullivan Island Resort. The room erupted in excited murmurs. Sullivan Island Resort was notorious for its exclusivity, with waiting lists extending months even for the wealthiest clients. Celebrities sought its privacy, tech billionaires its discretion, and politicians its security. The average person would never set foot on its immaculate shores. For those unfamiliar, Richard continued, clearly relishing being the bearer of such news, Sullivan Island Resort is consistently ranked among the top 3 most exclusive destinations in the world. Rooms start at $5,000 per night, but we won't be staying in rooms. He paused dramatically. We'll be in private villas. More gasps and whispers. I sat perfectly still, maintaining a neutral expression while my mind raced. This wasn't just any Sullivan property. It was our flagship, my father's pride and joy. The resort where I'd learned to snorkel, where I knew every staff member by name, where the head chef Marcos still made my favorite passion fruit soufflé whenever I visited. This is an exceptional networking opportunity, Richard emphasized, clicking to the next slide. Several industry leaders will be staying on the island during our visit. The connections we make could transform Horizon's client roster for years to come. The following slide displayed a list of attendees. I scanned it automatically, then did a double take. My name wasn't there. I rechecked, certain it was a mistake. The list included all department heads, the executive team, several mid-level managers, and even some junior staff members who were Richard's obvious favorites. But Emma Sullivan was conspicuously absent. Richard's eyes met mine briefly as he scrolled through the slide, a subtle smirk playing at the corner of his mouth before he quickly moved on to discuss logistics. This wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. Departure is next Thursday morning. Julia has prepared welcome packages with all the details, he concluded, gesturing to the gift bags. If your name was on the list, please collect your package after the meeting. The remainder of the all-hands passed in a blur of departmental updates and quarterly projections that I couldn't focus on. My mind kept returning to the missing name, my name, and the calculated slight it represented. When the meeting finally adjourned, I watched colleagues eagerly grab their tropical-themed gift bags while avoiding eye contact with me. I waited until the initial excitement died down before approaching Richard's office. Taking a steadying breath, I knocked on his open door with controlled professionalism. "Do you have a moment to discuss the retreat?" I asked, maintaining the pleasant, non-confrontational tone I'd perfected over years of navigating corporate politics. "Emma. Of course, come in," Richard replied with exaggerated welcome, not bothering to stand. He didn't close the door, the first warning sign. "I noticed my name wasn't on the attendee list," I began evenly. "Given that I'm leading the Apex account and we exceeded our targets by 22% this quarter, I wanted to check if it was an oversight." Richard's expression shifted from false warmth to something colder, more authentic. "It wasn't an oversight, Emma. This retreat is for team members who exemplify Horizon's executive vision." "I'm not sure I understand," I said, though I understood perfectly. "How can I put this delicately?" He leaned forward, keeping his voice just loud enough to carry. "Your presence would bring down the caliber of attendees. Your work is," he paused, "adequate, but your overall presentation lacks the polish we need when networking with potential high-value clients." Each word was precision-engineered to wound while maintaining plausible deniability. Nothing overtly discriminatory, nothing actionable, just devastating personal criticism delivered with a veneer of professional concern. "Your presentation style is basic at best," he continued, gaining momentum. "The retreat will feature formal dinners, executive mingles. Your lackluster presence and, frankly, uninspired wardrobe choices would reflect poorly on Horizon." I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck but kept my expression neutral, acutely aware of colleagues in nearby cubicles pretending not to listen while absorbing every syllable. "Perhaps you could use this time to develop more executive presence," Richard suggested with faux helpfulness. "Maybe invest in a more professional wardrobe?" Those sensible shoes and off-the-rack blazers might work for client meetings in the city, but Sullivan Island is another level entirely. The irony was almost painful. I probably knew the dress code expectations at Sullivan Island better than anyone in the building. I'd helped write them. I appreciate your feedback, I replied, my voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. Is there anything else I should focus on during your absence? The Henderson revisions, of course, and preliminary work on the Wilson holiday campaign. Nothing too strategic. Tyler can handle direction when we return. He waved dismissively. That'll be all, Emma. I walked back to my desk through what felt like an invisible corridor of judgment. Colleagues suddenly needed to check their phones or became deeply engrossed in their monitors as I passed. No one made eye contact. No one offered even a sympathetic glance. That's when I made my decision. For 3 years I'd suppressed my background, denied my connections, and pursued validation through merit alone. And what had it gotten me? Exclusion, undermining, and public humiliation. I pulled out my phone and sent my father a second text. Let's make some arrangements for next week. But on my terms. It was time for Richard Blackwell to learn exactly whose caliber he'd been questioning. My apartment felt different that evening. Smaller somehow, as though the walls were pressing in with the weight of the day's humiliation. I kicked off my sensible pumps, tossed my supposedly inadequate blazer over a chair, and poured myself 2 fingers of the 30-year-old Macallan my father had gifted me last Christmas. The one luxury I permitted myself behind closed doors. The amber liquid burned pleasantly as I took my first sip and stared out at the city lights. My phone buzzed on the counter. Dad was calling. Hey, Dad, I answered, trying to sound normal but hearing the strain in my own voice. Emma. His tone was gentle but probing. What's this about the retreat? I thought you were keeping work and family strictly separated. I sank onto my couch, suddenly exhausted. That was the plan. Until my boss decided I wasn't caliber enough to attend a retreat at our own resort. The words tumbled out, laced with more bitterness than I'd intended. Dad was silent for a moment and I could picture his expression. The one where his eyes narrowed and his jaw tightened slightly. The look that had made business rivals tremble. I'll handle it, he said finally, his voice low and dangerous. One call and this Richard person won't just be uninvited from the resort. He'll be uninvited from his job. No. I sat up straighter. That's exactly what I don't want. I've spent 3 years building a career without your intervention. And look where that's gotten you, excluded and disrespected. It's gotten me authentic experience, I countered. If you step in now, everything I've worked for becomes meaningless. I need to handle this myself. The line went quiet, save for the distant sound of waves from his end. He was on the terrace at the main house, probably watching the sunset over the Pacific. What do you propose? He asked finally. Let them come to the resort. Let events unfold naturally. I took another sip of whiskey, feeling a plan crystallize. But I need Carlos to know I'm coming, and I need the presidential villa. Dad chuckled, his mood instantly lighter. The presidential villa? The one you helped design? That's a $25,000 per night booking. Precisely. For the first time that day I smiled. And I need you not to warn them who I am. Let me handle the reveal myself. This sounds like the Emma I know, he said, pride evident in his voice. The presidential villa is yours. I'll have Carlos prepare everything to your specifications. After we hung up, I didn't immediately succumb to sleep despite my exhaustion. Instead, I opened my laptop and began meticulously documenting every instance of Richard's discrimination, every snide comment, every stolen idea, and every project reassignment. By 2 a.m., I had compiled a comprehensive record of 3 years' worth of subtle undermining and not-so-subtle dismissals. The temptation to resign immediately was strong, but that would be emotional, not strategic. Richard needed to learn a lesson, not simply lose an employee he didn't value. And Horizon, despite its flaws, had other talented staff who deserved better leadership. Perhaps, I thought as I finally drifted off, this could be an opportunity for broader change. The following week was an exercise in restraint. Richard seemed to take particular pleasure in discussing retreat plans within my earshot, often pausing his conversations to ask me pointed questions. Emma, we're debating whether to go snorkeling or sailing first day. Any thoughts? Oh wait, he'd smirk. You won't be there to worry about it. Each time I'd simply smile and continue working. My apparent lack of reaction seemed to frustrate him, driving him to escalate his provocations. "The Henderson campaign looks passable," he remarked, dropping my revised mock-ups on my desk. "Work up some alternate concepts while we're gone. Should be plenty quiet around here for you to focus." "Of course," I replied pleasantly. "Anything else you need before your departure?" My calm seemed to unsettle him. He'd expected tears, resignation, or confrontation, not this measured professionalism. By Wednesday, 3 days before the retreat, he'd assigned me 4 additional projects with urgent deadlines that mysteriously coincided with the team's return. The most telling disappointment came from Margot. After our promising connection, I'd hoped she might question my exclusion or at least maintain our professional relationship. Instead, she began avoiding me entirely. Twice I caught her changing direction in the hallway upon seeing me. When we were unavoidably in the same meeting, she addressed her comments to others, even when responding to my points. It culminated Thursday afternoon when I approached her office to discuss the Apex timeline. "Not a good time," she said briskly, not looking up from her monitor. "Send me an email. I'll review it after the retreat." "I thought you wanted to be involved with Apex," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She finally looked up, expression carefully blank. "Priorities have shifted. Richard feels the account needs a more executive approach." "I see." And I did see, crystal clear. Margot had made her calculations. Aligning with the excluded employee offered less value than cementing her position with the boss. Corporate allyship at its finest. "Nothing personal," she added, already looking back at her screen, dismissing me. The sting of betrayal was sharp but clarifying. This wasn't just about Richard anymore. It was about an entire culture that rewarded the wrong values. By Friday morning, the office was abuzz with pre-retreat excitement. Colleagues compared notes on resort wear and sunscreen recommendations. A table in the break room displayed newly purchased sunglasses and sun hats as people showed off their retreat preparations. No one approached my desk or met my eyes. I maintained my composed facade while confirming final arrangements via text with Carlos, the resort manager who'd known me since I was 10. Everything was prepared exactly as requested. That evening, I received an encrypted email from my father containing dozens of high-resolution photographs of the presidential villa's recent renovation, a project I'd contributed significant design input to during my final year of college. The soaring windows overlooking the private beach, the infinity pool that seemed to blend into the ocean horizon, the 6 luxurious bedroom suites, each with a unique theme inspired by different Sullivan properties around the world. I studied each image carefully, mentally mapping the space where Richard's humiliation would unfold. The grand entrance with its 20-foot ceilings. The open-concept living area where welcome champagne would be served. The exact spot where Carlos would make the introduction that would change everything. As I packed my own bag, not for the commercial flight the Horizon team would take tomorrow, but for my father's private jet that would depart 3 hours earlier, I felt an unfamiliar sensation. Anticipation without anxiety. For 3 years I'd hidden my true self, seeking validation that would never come from people who judged by appearances rather than substance. That ended tomorrow. I wasn't just reclaiming my name, I was reclaiming my worth. My phone lit up with a final text from Dad. Jet-fueled and waiting. Presidential villa prepared to your specifications. Carlos sends his regards and says revenge is best served with ocean views. I smiled and responded simply. Tell him I prefer it served with clarity. Tomorrow, Richard Blackwell would learn exactly whose caliber he had been questioning. Morning arrived with perfect cinematic timing, clear skies, gentle breeze, and sunlight that seemed to illuminate possibilities rather than realities. The private Sullivan jet waited on the tarmac, its sleek silhouette familiar and yet somehow new in this context. For the first time in 3 years I was stepping fully into both worlds. Emma the marketing strategist and Emma Sullivan, heiress to a hospitality empire. "Welcome aboard, Miss Sullivan," the flight attendant greeted me with the warm professionalism unique to our longest-serving staff. "It's wonderful to see you again." "Thank you, Diane. How's your daughter doing at UCLA?" Her face brightened with surprised pleasure. "She's thriving in the architecture program." "I can't believe you remembered." "Of course I did. Please send her my congratulations." This was the difference between genuine connection and performance. I actually cared about our staff and their lives. Something Richard, for all his executive posturing, would never understand. The 3-hour flight passed in peaceful preparation. Instead of my usual, inadequate work attire, I'd chosen an understated but unmistakably expensive white linen dress, gold sandals from a small Italian designer, and a single piece of jewelry, my mother's sapphire pendant that matched the Sullivan Resort's signature blue. Nothing flashy but everything quality. The look said I belong here without screaming it. Carlos was waiting on the private landing strip when we touched down, his familiar smile as bright as the Caribbean sun overhead. "Little Emma," he exclaimed, embracing me with genuine affection before stepping back to study my face. "Though not so little anymore. Your father said you've become quite the marketing genius." "Hardly a genius," I laughed. "Just hardworking and underestimated. A powerful combination." He winked, offering his arm as we walked toward the waiting golf cart. "Now tell me exactly how you want this to unfold. Your father mentioned something about an appropriate comeuppance for some very deserving individuals." For the next hour, Carlos and I meticulously planned the choreography of the afternoon's revelation. The Horizon team would arrive at 2 p.m., giving us ample time to prepare. I showed him photos of Richard so he would recognize my boss immediately, explained the dynamics I wanted to highlight, and emphasized one critical point. I don't want anyone fired or the retreat ruined. This isn't about destruction, it's about recalibration. "Understood completely," Carlos nodded. "Though I must say, your father seemed disappointed when I relayed your instruction not to accidentally lose your boss's luggage in the ocean." We shared a knowing laugh. Dad's protective instincts were legendary. By 1:30, I had taken my position in the resort's grand lobby, partially concealed behind an extravagant arrangement of native flowers and foliage. The strategic location offered perfect sight lines to the entrance while keeping me hidden from immediate view. Carlos stood at the reception desk, reviewing final details with his staff, occasionally catching my eye with subtle nods of reassurance. At precisely 2:07 p.m., the doors swung open and the Horizon marketing team streamed in, faces flushed with excitement and the mild humidity. Richard led the procession, designer sunglasses perched on his head, wearing a tropical shirt that still had visible fold lines from its packaging. Behind him trailed the executive team, then department heads, and finally the chosen favorites from junior ranks. "This," Richard announced dramatically, arms spread wide as though personally presenting the resort to his subordinates, "is what true luxury looks like." From my hidden vantage point, I watched my colleagues' genuine awe as they absorbed the soaring ceilings with their hand-carved details, the panoramic ocean views, and the tasteful display of indigenous art. Phones immediately appeared as everyone began documenting their arrival, posing before they'd even properly checked in. "Remember everyone," Richard's voice carried throughout the lobby, "we are representing Horizon here. I've personally been to Sullivan properties before and can tell you they have extremely high standards." I suppressed a smile, knowing for a fact that Richard had never stayed at any Sullivan property. Our minimal digital footprint and invitation-only booking system made lying about past stays a common but easily disproven boast. "The owner himself is famously particular," Richard continued, his fabrications growing bolder. "Robert Sullivan and I actually discussed marketing strategies when I encountered him in Aspen last winter." My eyebrows shot up. Dad hadn't been to Aspen in over 5 years, preferring our properties in the southern hemisphere during winter months. The audacity of Richard's lie was almost impressive. "When approaching staff, remember they've served actual celebrities. Act like you belong," he instructed, adjusting his collar importantly. "Speaking of which, Jennifer Lawrence stayed in this very resort last month. We had a lovely chat by the infinity pool." I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing outright. Jennifer Lawrence had indeed stayed recently, in the same presidential villa that awaited them, but the resort's strict privacy protocols meant no other guest would have been allowed near her private pool area. Richard's fantasy world was about to collide spectacularly with reality. Carlos caught my eye, giving the subtlest nod. "Showtime." He approached the group with the perfect balance of deference and authority that had made him legendary in luxury hospitality circles. "Welcome to Sullivan Island Resort. I'm Carlos Mendez, General Manager. We're delighted to have Horizon Marketing with us." Richard immediately stepped forward, hand extended. "Richard Blackwell, President of Horizon." I believe my assistant confirmed our arrangements for the executive ocean villas. Indeed, Mr. Blackwell, Carlos nodded politely. However, there's been a significant upgrade to your accommodations. Richard's expression shifted to calculating pleasure, likely assuming his name-dropping had somehow earned special treatment. Carlos continued, if you'll just allow me to greet. He paused, eyes scanning the lobby before finding me. Miss Sullivan. I stepped out from behind the floral arrangement, feeling all eyes instantly turn in my direction. Richard's face registered confusion as Carlos walked past him and embraced me warmly. We've been eagerly anticipating your return, Carlos said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Your father called personally to ensure everything is prepared to your exact specifications. The silence was absolute. I could practically hear the mental gears grinding as my colleagues processed what they were witnessing. Thank you, Carlos, I replied, matching his volume. It's wonderful to be home. Richard's face underwent a remarkable transformation, confusion dissolving into disbelief, then morphing into horrified recognition. The blood drained from his features so rapidly that for a moment I worried he might actually faint. Emma, he managed, his voice barely a whisper. I turned to him with a pleasant smile. Hello, Richard. Surprise. He took a stumbling step backward, colliding with the reception desk. A staff member reached out to steady him as he gripped the counter edge for support. But you, how? Sullivan? He stuttered, looking between Carlos and me with increasing panic. Carlos, consummate professional that he was, continued as though nothing unusual was happening. Everyone, please follow me to the presidential villa that Miss Sullivan has graciously reserved for your company's use. The presidential villa? Margot echoed, finding her voice first among my stunned colleagues. Yes, Carlos confirmed cheerfully. The crown jewel of our property. $25,000 per night, though of course there's no charge for Ms. Sullivan's guests. As Carlos led the shell-shocked group toward the waiting golf carts, I fell into step beside Richard, who was still struggling to compose himself. Don't worry, I said quietly for his ears only. I wouldn't dream of bringing down the caliber of attendees. After all, this is what true luxury looks like. The procession through the lobby felt surreal. I walked beside Carlos with practiced ease while my colleagues shuffled behind us like bewildered tourists. In my peripheral vision, I caught glimpses of their transformation. The same people who had avoided eye contact with me for days were now attempting to catch my attention with eager smiles and nervous waves. Jason, who had been assigned to support my Apex project, actually bumped into a marble column because he was staring at me instead of watching where he was walking. Tyler, the other junior executive Richard had placed on my project, whispered something urgently to Margot, who nodded while maintaining a frozen smile in my direction. Richard trailed slightly behind, his breathing audibly labored as though he'd run a marathon instead of walking across a lobby. The man who had dominated every room at Horizon now seemed physically diminished, his shoulders hunched as though trying to become invisible. The contrast was so striking that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Your golf carts await, Carlos announced as we exited onto a covered pavilion where a line of luxury vehicles stood ready. Miss Sullivan, will you be riding in the lead cart with me? I'd be delighted, I replied, noticing Richard step forward automatically before realizing the invitation wasn't for him. He retreated awkwardly as Carlos helped me into the front passenger seat. Our small convoy wound through the lush tropical landscape, following paths I knew by heart. As we passed a particular grove of palm trees, I turned to Carlos with genuine warmth. The coconut palms look beautiful. Maria's team has done wonders with the landscaping this season. She'll be thrilled you noticed, Carlos replied. She still talks about how you helped her plan the native plant restoration project when you were just 15. From the back seat, I heard a small gasp from Lisa, our HR director who had been assigned to ride with us. Her expression in the side mirror revealed the dawning realization that my knowledge of the resort wasn't something hastily researched to impress colleagues. As we continued, I pointed out features to Carlos that I knew would be overheard. I see Dad finally implemented my suggestion about the meditation pavilion near the East Cove. The placement catches the sunrise perfectly. Your design input has always been valued, Carlos responded naturally. The architects still reference your college thesis on integrative luxury spaces when discussing renovations. Each casual exchange reinforced what Richard and the others were rapidly discovering. My connection to the Sullivan brand wasn't just familial. It was foundational. I had helped shape the very paradise they had been so excited to visit, the exclusive sanctuary they had deemed me unworthy of entering. Our procession arrived at the presidential villa, its dramatic architecture rising from the cliffside to command breathtaking ocean views from 3 sides. The staff stood ready in a welcoming formation that I recognized as our VIP protocol, the same greeting we would give to visiting heads of state or international celebrities. "Welcome to your home for the next 4 days," Carlos announced to the group as we entered the soaring main hall with its 20-foot windows and indigenous hardwood details. "Miss Sullivan has arranged for the entire villa to be at your exclusive disposal." The collective intake of breath was audible as my colleagues absorbed the staggering luxury of the space. The infinity pool that seemed to merge with the ocean horizon, the museum-quality art collection, the multiple lounge areas with their bespoke furnishings. "Carlos, would you mind if I handle the room assignments?" I asked, taking the villa's tablet from him with practiced familiarity. "I have some specific thoughts on which spaces would best suit each guest." "Of course, Miss Sullivan," he replied with the barest hint of a conspiratorial smile. I tapped through the tablet with deliberate casualness. "Let's see. Julia and Lisa, you'll be in the Ocean Master Suites." Their eyes widened at being assigned the villa's most prestigious accommodations, typically reserved for the highest-ranking executives. "Tyler and Jason, you'll have the Coral Suites with the private plunge pools." One by one, I assigned the most luxurious rooms to the junior staff members who had shown me basic human decency over the years, working my way up the corporate hierarchy in reverse. Margot's expression soured as she realized she would be in one of the smaller suites, though still obscenely luxurious by any normal standard. Finally, only Richard remained unassigned. "And Richard, you'll be in the Garden Suite." I smiled pleasantly. What I didn't mention was that this particular room, while comfortable, had originally been designed for personal staff accompanying VIP guests. It was the only suite without an ocean view, overlooking the service entrance instead. "Staff will show you to your accommodations," I continued smoothly. "Please take time to refresh and relax. We'll gather for welcome cocktails on the main terrace at sunset, followed by dinner at 8. As the group dispersed, Richard approached me with the desperate smile of a drowning man spotting a distant lifeboat. "Emma, Miss Sullivan, might I have a word in private?" I led him to a small sitting area partially screened by tropical plants, deliberately choosing a spot where we would still be visible to others but not audible. "Emma," he began, voice trembling slightly, "I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding." "Really?" I kept my expression neutral. "Please elaborate." "My decision regarding your attendance at the retreat, it wasn't what you think." He leaned forward, eyes darting nervously. "I was actually protecting you." "Protecting me?" I repeated, allowing genuine curiosity to color my tone. "Absolutely." His confidence seemed to grow with my apparent receptiveness. "I suspected you might have connections here. Intuition really from our past conversations. I was concerned that if others discovered your family ties, they might try to exploit the relationship professionally." The audacity of this transparent fabrication was almost impressive. I maintained eye contact but offered no response, allowing the silence to stretch uncomfortably. "The comment about caliber, completely misinterpreted," he continued desperately. "I meant you were above the caliber of our regular corporate retreats. Too sophisticated, really." When I still didn't respond, he added, "I've always valued your contributions, Emma. Always." I let the statement hang in the air until the silence became physically uncomfortable. "How interesting," I finally said, standing up. "If you'll excuse me, I need to check on dinner arrangements." The evening unfolded exactly as I'd envisioned during those meticulous planning sessions. The welcome dinner was served on the main terrace as the sun painted the sky in impossible shades of orange and pink. The executive chef, who had taught me to make my first soufflé when I was 12, prepared a 7-course tasting menu featuring local delicacies and Sullivan's signature dishes. As we dined, I found myself genuinely enjoying the expressions of surprise on my colleagues' faces when I casually discussed wine vintages with the sommelier, recognized subtle flavor profiles in each course, and shared anecdotes about the artists whose work adorned the villa walls. These weren't affectations or performances. They were genuine parts of myself I had deliberately suppressed at Horizon to avoid standing out. Across the table, Richard picked at his food, attempting occasional contributions to the conversation that fell awkwardly flat. His usual bombastic confidence had evaporated, replaced by a painful awareness that the corporate hierarchy he'd wielded so comfortably had been completely inverted in a single afternoon. By the time dessert was served, the message had been received by everyone present. True power didn't need to announce itself, and genuine accomplishment couldn't be faked. The real Emma Sullivan had finally stepped into the light, and she wasn't going anywhere. The final morning of the retreat dawned with a clarity that seemed symbolic. For 3 days, my colleagues had navigated this new reality with varying degrees of adaptation. Some, like the junior staff members, had blossomed in an environment where their ideas were suddenly valued. Others, particularly those who had been complicit in Richard's behavior, maintained a careful distance, unsure where they stood in this recalibrated world. Richard himself had become a ghost of his former self, appearing at scheduled activities with a subdued demeanor that bordered on meekness. His usual domineering presence had vanished, replaced by a man who seemed afraid of his own shadow, or more accurately, afraid of mine. I was reviewing the day's agenda with Carlos when his expression shifted to one of pleased surprise. Looking past me toward the villa's main entrance, he nodded respectfully. "It appears we have an unexpected visitor." I turned to find my father walking through the grand doorway, his commanding presence immediately filling the space. At 62, Robert Sullivan remained an imposing figure, tall, fit, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that could assess a business opportunity or an individual's character with equal precision. "Dad!" I exclaimed, genuinely surprised. We had agreed he would stay away to allow me to handle the situation independently. "Good morning, sweetheart," he replied, embracing me warmly before turning to greet Carlos. I noticed my colleagues at the breakfast buffet freeze in place, recognition dawning on their faces. Robert Sullivan rarely appeared in public or business publications, but when he did, it was impossible to mistake him. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," Dad said, loud enough for others to hear. I couldn't resist seeing how Horizon Marketing was enjoying our humble accommodations. "Not at all," I replied, playing along with his humble characterization of the $25,000 per night villa. "We were just about to have breakfast. Will you join us?" "I'd be delighted." The meal that followed was a masterclass in subtle intimidation. Dad was unfailingly polite as I introduced him to each team member, but his gaze lingered a fraction longer on those I had privately mentioned as Richard's enablers. When Richard himself approached with an extended hand and nervous smile, Dad's handshake was brief and his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Fascinating property you have here, Mr. Sullivan," Richard offered weakly. "Thank you," Dad replied. "Though I must apologize for our communication system. The villa's microphones are surprisingly sensitive. Picked up some interesting conversations yesterday. Something about caliber of attendees." He glanced at me with a raised eyebrow. "Technical glitch we're working on." Richard's face drained of color as he realized his private comments in his room had been overheard. Though Dad was bluffing, our privacy standards would never allow such monitoring. Richard had no way of knowing that. As the team finished breakfast, Dad stood to address the group. "I'd like to propose a slight change to today's agenda with Emma's permission." I nodded, curious where he was going with this. "Instead of the scheduled golf tournament, I've arranged for a special team-building activity supporting the island's coral reef restoration project. It's something close to my heart and to Emma's." He gestured to a display set up near the terrace doors that hadn't been there earlier. Photographs of previous restoration efforts, charts showing progress, and I was startled to see several images of myself from over the years, working alongside marine biologists and local conservationists. "What many of you may not know," Dad continued, "is that Emma has been anonymously funding similar environmental initiatives for years. In fact, the educational component of our coral nursery program was largely her design." Murmurs rippled through the assembled group as this new information registered. The Emma they thought they knew, the one they had judged as lacking caliber, had been quietly making significant contributions while seeking no recognition. Following breakfast, the team changed into appropriate attire and headed to the Marine Conservation Center where local experts guided them through the process of preparing coral fragments for transplantation. I found myself working alongside junior team members who were suddenly eager to engage with me, asking thoughtful questions about both the conservation project and my marketing insights. During a break, I noticed Richard standing alone at the edge of the beach, staring out at the horizon. The moment had arrived. I walked over, carrying a folder I had retrieved from my room. "Beautiful view," I commented, standing beside him. He flinched slightly, then nodded. "Emma, Before you say anything else," I interrupted gently, "I'd like you to review these documents." I handed him the folder containing my meticulously compiled evidence. Emails, meeting notes, project reassignments, patterns of discrimination, and instances where my ideas had been attributed to others. He flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from defensive to defeated as he recognized the undeniable pattern revealed by his own actions and words. "I could present these to the board," I said quietly, "or file a formal complaint." "You're going to destroy me," he whispered. "No," I replied. "That was never my intention. I'm offering you something else, redemption." His head snapped up in surprise. "Mandatory sensitivity training. A complete restructuring of Horizon's advancement policies to ensure transparency and merit-based promotion. And your public support for these changes." "And if I refuse?" "Then yes, these documents go to the board. But I'm hoping you'll choose growth over destruction." The silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of waves and distant voices from our colleagues. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why offer me a way out after everything?" "Because revenge might feel satisfying momentarily, but it doesn't create lasting change. Transformation does." That evening's closing dinner was held on the beach, with torches illuminating tables set directly on the sand. As the meal concluded, I rose to address the group, feeling a sense of purpose I'd been lacking for too long. 3 years ago, I made a choice to hide part of my identity in pursuit of authentic achievement. I began. I wanted to succeed or fail based on my own merits, not my family name. I glanced around at the attentive faces. What I discovered instead was how privilege operates in subtle ways, even when you try to set it aside. My experience at Horizon opened my eyes to challenges that many face without the safety net I always had, regardless of how I lived my daily life. Richard sat with his gaze lowered as I continued. "Moving forward, Horizon Marketing will be implementing new policies to ensure truly equitable opportunities for advancement. And we'll be launching a partnership with the Sullivan Foundation to provide paid internships and mentorship for students without family connections or traditional advantages in our industry." The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause. Whether from genuine support or recognition of the new power dynamics was unclear, but the seed had been planted. 6 months later, as I sat in what had once been Richard's office, now mine after his conveniently timed health-related departure, I reviewed the quarterly results with satisfaction. Under my leadership as president, Horizon had not only implemented comprehensive diversity policies but had also increased profitability by 34%. My office remained simply furnished. No status symbols or expensive art. My clothes were still chosen for quality and practicality rather than designer labels. The difference was that now these choices represented authentic values rather than necessary concealment. On my desk sat a small piece of coral in a glass display, a reminder from that pivotal retreat. Beside it was a photo of my father and me standing with the first group of foundation interns who had joined Horizon the previous month. The intercom buzzed and my assistant's voice came through. "Your father is on line 1. Something about planning next year's company retreat." I smiled as I picked up the phone. Some things had changed dramatically, but the most important things remained the same. "Hi, Dad," I answered. "I was just thinking about you."